Ladies and gentlemen, good morning or good evening to you. Today is June 29th, 2025, and I am recording from an undisclosed location due to emergencies. No, not emergencies. Due to events, uh, not our regular studio. Anyway, I want to record and broadcast this particular story before events completely overtake the the analysis and become old news. So first of all, uh, I want to mention a few things uh, that Sea Milk and Sapenza in their awesome uh, channels, China Fact Finders and ADV podcast, uh, have been doing awesome work in reporting stories from China, even though their perspectives are a little bit biased in terms of uh, predicting a little bit, yeah, wish fulfillment in predicting imminent regime change in China, uh, which is unlikely to happen in the near term. We'll get to potential risks later, uh, but they specialize, for example, in here, they specialize in showing stories of people in China being upset and later on going into uh, various uh, protests and reporting on the protests in the Weibo and Red Envelope and all that Little Red Book, uh, TikTok, uh, and then these emergent phenomenon become so popular that the Communist Party censors then start really suppressing the stories, but not before the story had already gone out, because of their organic grassroots, as uh, the Communist Party would say, uh, bottom up nature of the stories. And that is, in fact, a very useful note for analysts to understand, uh, distinguishing between top-down versus bottom-up phenomena, especially because as government paid analysts and also organization analysts in general, we are conditioned to think about things in terms of being top down, that the organizations are acting with intent and strategizing and organizing particular events to make them happen. Uh, but in fact, the world is very much a combination of both top-down, strategized, uh, organized events and approaches, as well as bottom-up. That things do happen organically, and people do self-organize in some kind of fashion. And bottom-up events generally are not as well organized as top-down events. But because bottom-up, by their nature, just like the computing problem and the economics in general, because uh, uh, well, the communist information computing problem, yeah, from among as von Mises has had formulated that only bottom-up events can account for all information that the people uh, that the organization or an emergent organization is fully aware of, because by the very nature of any kind of human activity, the people at the top of the organization do not have full information of what is going on. Everyone has a little bit of pieces of information, but not all of the pieces of information. Uh, Therefore, when things are not happening as well as the as an organization predicts, then the top-down strategy cannot account for all of the contingencies and all of the issues. In this case of Chinese protests and protestable events, uh, people something will happen that piss people off, and because of the biases of the people, of the censors and the cadre themselves, they cannot understand how something like this is upsetting to regular people in the first place, and therefore they initially ignore what is going on or try to hide it uh, until the problems start exploding. And then they finally realize what the problem that this is becoming a problem, and therefore they have to start suppressing the protest. And in that sense, so therefore, this is why things like this keep happening in China, that people are getting upset, especially more and more frequently recently, in the 2000s, since the 2000s. Uh, we'll talk about that more in a minute. But uh, over in the 2000s, after the Communist Party became more money oriented, well, really it became money oriented in the 90s, but it didn't become as serious a problem until the 2000s, really. That's when it really coalesced into being a full problem. That they're too focused on the cadre and the party leaders are too focused on making money, and therefore they started to not pay attention as much to why people are upset. I mean, if the Communist Party pays attention to the people's mood and actually try to make them happy in the communist sense. Of course, communists don't think of happiness the same way as regular people do. But if the Communist Party is really trying to work for the common welfare as they think they're supposed to, then they would much earlier started to pay attention and find out some things are pissing people off, like for example worker safety, that workers are not being protected, or uh, that the developers are taking away people's land unfairly, not paying them fair compensation, and therefore people get upset about that. That the information feedback mechanism that the Communist Party is supposed to have with the people would be working, and the information will be flowing out that, hey, you know, we need to protect the people. But because since the 2000s, the party was more focused on making money, therefore they started siding with the factory owners who are undercutting worker safety, the developers who are trying to make money and not pay people the just compensation for expropriating their land, uh, and all the other stuff that people are protesting about. Uh, in this case, uh, for example, this particular story where uh, a uh, Chinese doctors were actually cheating the system to become doctors, uh, and therefore not really knowing what they're doing while they're taking the doctor's pay and pretending to be real doctors and screwing up patients' lives and letting people die and all that. Obviously, it also says a lot about what doctors really do day to day. That's really not that difficult for someone to pretend to do and do a passable job of it most of the time until they have a real difficult problem where they can kill people. People can die. And of course, that is why we do need doctors, and yeah, we don't get that. But anyway, so this is another story that people get upset about, where uh, people can use their connections to cheat the medical education system and become doctors when they're not qualified. We'll have the links up to all of these in the story description later, and maybe in the story links. But anyway, so the point of all that is the fact that these stories exist, that people are upset and protesting, organic. They have all the hallmarks of organic phenomena. People come together and that they keep happening, and that this system has to suppress them and has to actually arrest a lot of people to suppress these stories, and that otherwise unconstrained, the stories can spread everywhere, yeah, on all the platforms. It just goes to show, demonstrate that yes, the communists are in big trouble. They have significant problems with the information feedback mechanism. Now, the saving grace for communists, the commies, is that they are recognizing when problems do become unignorable. Uh, and perhaps now they have the information so that if they do need to do something about it, like for example, holding people to account for bringing the trouble in the first place to get people riled up, like punishing the developers and all that, they have the information to do it, and they probably they are doing some of that, especially with the anti-corruption campaigns, that where they are uh, uh, holding some of them to account to warn the others not to do it. 杀鸡儆猴, of course, the Chinese aphorism. But so the point is that the fact that these protests get suppressed shows that the information feedback mechanism of the Communist Party does work sometimes. Uh, that it's dysfunctional, but functional nonetheless. So when the Communist Party will really fail is when the information mechanisms, feedback mechanisms are no longer functioning, that protests and memes can spread and become almost universal knowledge before the uh, before the censors start taking action. That in fact you would have a June 4th Tiananmen Square style suppression where you have to have soldiers shoot the people in the streets. That is when you know the Communist Party has completely failed. Uh, that it's no longer a functioning information flow, well, uh, information flow computer. Because that's one way to think of organizations, that uh, they absorb information input and compute and output, uh, and that the Communist Party would have completely failed if they do not notice memes and protests spreading throughout the whole country before they have to really suppress them with armed force. Uh, but anyway, uh, on the other hand, that the fact that people are protesting uh, organically means that they are upset about what's going on, and that there are problems. Now, there are always problems. And here we have to apply some of Night Watch regime stability analytical framework. Unfortunately, I do not know the complete framework. Only what I have picked up from reading Night Watch over the years before he died. Night Watch was an open source analyst for the J2, the joint staff J2, and he was the person that invented the Night Watch open source intelligence and analysis newsletter, the daily newsletter, and also uh, developed the a lot of analytical framework, and also put out a uh, very popular newsletter after he retired from J2 and started working on his own. These were treasure troves of information that anyone, uh, all intelligence analysts should pay attention to and read uh, to help understand uh, how to apply analytical techniques. But anyway, unfortunately, he died almost 10 years ago. Rest in peace, Night Watch. Anyway, so the Night Watch analytical framework for regime stability, first of all, says that uh, instability always happens from the peripheral into the center. That if there's a problem, organic problem, you will always start taking place on the outskirts, outside of the center of power, which in this case is Beijing. Beijing is the center of power in China. Shanghai probably thinks they are the center of power, and uh, the Shenzhen, of course. But no, the center of power in China is in Beijing. Uh, Now, if something happens in Beijing directly without indicators in the peripherals, like Xinjiang or uh, Chengdu, then Yunnan, then it means that it is really a struggle between the elites. Uh, Maybe there's a coup, but it's not a regime change. It's not a regime stability. The regime is still existing. The instruments of power are still belonging to the same uh, organization. It's more that factions within the organization are trying to take over, uh, but that does not mean that the system itself will change. So, for example, when we had when we had, say, the the Pakistan coup, when the the various times when the Pakistani army took over from the civilian government, the nominally civilian government, uh, what they did was really all happen within the capital city. They did not really start out with an armed struggle way outside the capital city, and uh, the army just took over, arrested the civilians, and installed their own uh, bureaucrats. Uh, but the system didn't really change, and it was an elite struggle. Uh, Whereas, say, the Turkish coup attempt, when the Turkish factions of Turkish army tried to take over uh, uh, from Erdogan back in uh, 2019, 2018 timeframe. Uh, what they did was that they started by trying to seize uh, military instruments of power, both within the capital and also outside of the capital. Uh, and then elements started trying to take over inside of the capital to seize Erdogan and also take over the TV stations, the communication system, uh, which by the way is a standard tactic for coup and also any other governmental takeover. But anyway, in that case, we saw clear indications that it was not just inside of the capital itself, it was also way outside the capital. And that indicated that it was not just an elite struggle, but that it was actually trying to change the system. Uh, and the fact, so this whole center versus peripheral analysis is very good for understanding the indicators, distinguishing the indicators for different types of events. Uh, and of course, in Turkey's case, these the system, Erdogan's party had AKP had nearly completely taken over the system, which is why the army had to start from the periphery as well as inside the center, but they didn't have enough power inside of the center itself to take over because the AKP completely had significant support inside of the center uh, to protect themselves. They had installed significant amount of allies inside of the army. So the army, which is also why the coup ultimately failed, because the army didn't have enough power on its own. Uh, they tried to rouse up some popular support during the short crisis period, but again, it didn't. It did not build a big, broad enough power base. Really, the army at the time was a modernist force. It was not. Uh, it was not in the same mode of a populist reactionary movement that the AKP was. Uh, of course, the army was reactionary in its own way, but it was not. It did not start out trying to build popular support. It thought that enough people view the world the same way they do in terms of having a Western modern outlook, uh, the a socialist type of outlook. That's what uh, Ataturk had envisioned, and the army was trying to follow the Ataturk vision until Erdogan slapped them down and destroyed them in the aftermath. But anyway, so a populist insurgency will always start from the outside, and it has to start from the outside, start from the periphery, before building up the strength to contest in the center. And the maturity of the populist opposition or any kind of opposition is how much of a safe haven you can carve out for itself, that's free of the government control. And now eventually, of course, they will need to co-opt the elite somehow. The elite will join in. Some factions of the elite will eventually join in a populist insurgency, and the, an indicator of the success of the the opposition is if the elements of the police and the military join them, and that's the life cycle of insurgency. That it starts from the periphery, it carves out a safe haven. It's able to have limited local control in contest, local superiority in contest with the armed forces, and that the armed forces start defecting. But the defection of the armed forces is really uh, the beginning of the end for the regime. That the insurgency itself has become strong enough to be able to lure the factions of the military to join them. Now, of course, a subversive opposition can, for example, a foreign intelligence organization can try to hurry along uh, the populist opposition to mold them and guide them in meeting the indicators and making things happen. Uh, but again, it depends on the political talent of the populist opposition leaders themselves, whether they are smart enough to do things correctly, to uh, to not just meet the indicators, but to demonstrate the organizational strength that the indicators are supposed to represent, which again is uh, something that analysts need to watch out for, that they don't mistake the indicators for the phenomenon themselves. And here, again, Serpenza and Sea Milk talking about things going on. Now, this particular story, I think, okay, yeah. So this story is that a girl in school in uh, Hunan, was being harassed by the teacher, or multiple teachers, and eventually she committed suicide. Uh, and her classmates and the parents got very, very upset and started protesting the school. Uh, and the school's instinct, of course, was to protect the teacher. I don't know why, but they did. And then eventually the police started coming in, and the police started coming in, and they locked down, they closed down the school and kicked off all the people that are assembled, and then also blocked. They turned off. They had the hotels to stop accepting new customers in the city, uh, new travelers, so that all the protesters who are coming to protest the school could not stay in the hotel, and that they therefore have to live in the streets. And this just keeps showing all the military, the police presence around the schools, and that they were arresting people. Again, the regime, the Chinese communist regime is still uh, fairly stable at this point, uh, judging by the fact that these protests are not happening in Beijing, uh, that it's only happening in the they're not really in the periphery, but Hunan is fairly close to well, it's midway in the core. So again, since it's happening in Hunan, it indicates that things are getting fairly serious in China, that the popular discontent is very significant. Uh, Trying to find a picture of where people are staying in the streets because they turned off the hotels. Right, here you go. These are the protesters. Uh, I think this might be a separate story where their protest. Yeah, this is a separate story. Uh, That's the school protest uh, in Hunan. Yeah, and then in Hunan again. Yeah, wanted to confirm something. 自昌是 I was gonna say the particular province, but no. Anyway, uh, it also happened that the one of the banks in Hunan, the Hunan uh, Agricultural and Business Bank, Agricultural and Commerce Bank, uh, credit union, is not letting people draw from the deposit anymore. A bank failure. Uh, so people are camping out in the streets to protest the bank, and also they turned off. They blocked the hotels. I mean, the government turned off the hotels so that they couldn't go stay in the hotel. They had to stay in the streets or get busting every day. Uh, so again, this was a protest that eventually was successfully suppressed. But in the meantime, the stories have spread quite far. The fact that people are protesting, all these people, even if they were able to eventually arrest all of them. This is just keeps stressing the response capacity of the police, because eventually they will run out of spaces to detain all these people in the jails. And as Americans have found out, sometimes the jails themselves serve as a school for the people who have been jailed, where they can organize and meet up with other people who are in jail for the same problems. That many Islamic terrorists become more radicalized once they are in jail. Uh, for example, that the black nationalism is has grown significantly from being in jail. That black inmates develop more racial consciousness, as they might say, because they have been in jail, and therefore uh, start meeting and communicating with like-minded people in the same circumstances. But anyway, so first of all, the jails will reach capacity, and therefore they cannot jail everyone, uh, and therefore uh, secondly, that they will not have enough people to suppress the rebellion, and they have to start mobilizing people from other provinces to meet the demand of riot police. But then once you start having to move people, once if the local police cannot suppress the event, then that means that you are going to create weaknesses elsewhere, because they have to start shifting resources. Uh, that means other regions will become more successful in their protests. So that's the second point, that where we can see the indicators, the inflection point of the protest becoming more successful in the future, starting to gain real strength. This is Henan. Is that another bank? I think that's a different bank in Henan. Uh, yeah, that's Henan Bank. Okay, yes. Sorry, I was confused here. Uh, So is the Henan Agricultural Bank and the Hunan school systems. This is a little bit confusing, even for Chinese people, obviously, where Henan is north of the Hunan province. But anyway, one last thing I wanted to mention, because my mom and my maternal grandfather is from the Hunan province. Uh, Going back to the school system story, uh, the protests in the uh, Hunan school. Uh, First of all, the Hunan has some reputation among Chinese people that people, the women of Hunan are, first of all, Hunan is part of the Han um, core, uh, the southern Han Chinese core. Uh, that is a rich province, rich agricultural province where rice grows very well. I mean, rice grows very well everywhere. But Hunan is right off of the it's part directly inside of the Yangtze River basin, and therefore it has uh, very good water supply for growing rice, and they do very well at growing rice. But one of the reputations for Hunan is that the Hunan girls are more more passionate in terms of their expressing their anger. They are more quick to anger and also uh, more angry when they are upset than other Chinese women. Uh, so the fact that they are protesting against the school, uh, you see quite a few women there, in addition to the men. That's part of the Hunan woman reputation there. Uh, First of all, secondly, that the Hunan was a significant source of the KMT military when they started. My maternal grandfather was leading uh, units drawn from the Hunan province, and that it was a significant source of strength and backing for the KMT, the KMT, both the Chinese nationalist military and for the party. So the things are happening in Hunan is significant, and it's one of the all of the traditional KMT provinces are significant. Uh, KMT military had elements from the northeast uh, provinces and also from Shandong. There's a significant element of Shandong uh, soldiers in KMT, but Shandong and the northeast uh, are more from the warlords who joined the KMT. Now, of course, they're all nationalists in their own way, but different breed of nationalists. Uh, the people from the Hunan and other parts of the southern Han core are more uh, congruent with the KMT vision. So as the KMT come back, uh, if the KMT comes back, or if uh, the the communists start pulling back, then they will start pulling back from places like Hunan, where they were further away from the messages of the Communist Party and closer to the anti-communist visions. Okay, and that concludes segment 1 of this story.